Jacinta Price said after that vote that we've got to move on in terms of ushering in a whole new paradigm for Indigenous Affairs policy in this country. She's pushing very hard, as you know, for a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in remote communities. And she wants an audit of the billions we spend as taxpayers to find out, the money leaves Canberra, as I often say, but it does not hit the ground as it should. What do you think's got to happen now as a priority?
Well, I certainly don't think that the no vote means that we give up on trying to make a difference. I think what it means is that we should try to make a difference in much more effective ways. And as I often said in government, it's easier to spend money. It's hard to make a difference. And we're currently spending something like 50% more per student on education in remote Australia than in the rest of the country. And yet, plainly, if the kids aren't at school, the money isn't having an effect. So we've really got to go back to basics in these remote places and ensure that the kids do actually go to school. Wherever possible, the adults are actually at work or doing something useful for their community, and that communities are policed. And the biggest obstacle to these things has not been lack of spending or lack of goodwill. It's been a reluctance to have the same expectations of Aboriginal people as he would have of every other Australian, based on what I think is a largely misguided sense of guilt about the past. Now, the great thing about Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, who I think are national heroes, is that they were just as proud of their Australian identity as they were of their Indigenous identity. And they appreciate, in a way that some of the other Indigenous leaders I don't think have, the leaders who are much more into identity politics, they appreciated that all of us are, in a sense, a mixture of identities, and no one should, as it were, drive out the others. As Bob Menzies and John Howard often used to say, I think it's very apt, particularly at this time, the things that unite us as Australians should always be more important than anything that divides us.
All right, let's go to the Middle East, because I've said, much of this week, it's an absolute tinderbox. There's deployments now of Australian troops. We don't know the number. That was confirmed today by the Defence Minister, the Acting Prime Minister, Richard Marles. You've got the French President Emmanuel Macron. He has visited the region, as has Rishi Sunak and others, and I'll get to a question there regarding our Prime Minister in a moment. But Macron has said we should have a global coalition to fight Hamas in Gaza. Now, the PM's not keen. Our Prime Minister says he's not keen. He doesn't want to trigger a wider conflict, he said. He's focused on humanitarian aid. The UN's focused itself too on humanitarian aid. It's trying, I think, erroneously not to take sides. I do think there are sides between a nation state like Israel and a terror entity like Hamas. But given the world united in its opposition to Islamic State, and you were the Prime Minister at the time, what's your response here?
Well, I don't see any moral distinction between Hamas and their actions and Islamic State and its actions. What Hamas did against innocent civilians was utter depravity. It was utter barbarity. There could be no possible justification, no possible rationale for that kind of thing other than simple hatred and evil. Now, yes, the Israeli response has to be proportionate, but Hamas does have to be dealt with. Hamas really does have to be dealt with, and the world has to accept that there should be no place in any civilised heart for sympathy for Hamas.
Right, Presidents Biden and Macron have been there. Rishi Sunak's been to Israel as well as a show of solidarity. Our Prime Minister still hasn't even spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The Israeli ambassador to Australia said there's an invitation to Mr Albanese to visit. It's open. If it was you, if you were Prime Minister at this time, would you go?
Look, I think, if I may say so, it's a serious error of judgment by the Prime Minister. I think he really should be standing shoulder to shoulder with the government and the people of Israel. That doesn't mean he has to agree with everything the Israeli government has ever done. When it comes to Hamas on the one hand and the Israeli government on the other hand, there should be no question of even-handedness, certainly no question of moral equivalence, none whatsoever. You just have to be clearly on the side of a government which is trying to protect its people from potential extinction.
Former Prime Minister Tony Abbot, thank you for your time.